Before we adjust the size of rows and columns in the Customers application, I want to ensure that you understand how the sizing works. This is important so that you can successfully use the grid. Let's use here this grid with two row definitions as an example. This gray rectangle is the grid with the two row definitions. Let's also put a light blue rectangle into the grid. As the attached grid.row property is not set, the rectangle is placed by default in the first row of the grid. Now let's look at the row definitions. The height properties on the two row definitions are not set, which means that the default value of 1 star is used for each row definition. You can set the height properties explicitly to that default value of 1 star. With these star values, both rows have exactly the same size. Even if the grid gets bigger, both rows keep the same size and grow proportionally. Now, in front of the star, you can also write a factor. Let's use, for example, 3 for the first row definition. This means now that the two row definitions have in total 4 stars. So the first row definition gets 75% of the space and the second row definition gets 25%. Alright, this was star sizing. The next sizing approach is absolute sizing with pixels. You can set the height property, for example, to a value of 100 pixels, and then that row will have exactly a height of 100 pixels. It won't grow or shrink anymore when you resize the grid. Now, let's add a third row definition with a height of 1 star. This means now that the first row definition is 100 pixels high and the other two row definitions share the leftover space equally, as both have a height of 1 star. Now let's add an orange rectangle to the grid. As you can see, the attached property grid.row is set to 2, which means that this rectangle is placed in the third row of the grid. The height on that rectangle is set to 50 pixels, which means it does not grow to the available space that the row has. But now let's say that you want to make the third row of the grid exactly as high as the element that is inside. Of course, in this case here, you could just hardcode the height of the row definition to 50 pixels. But a better approach is to set the height of the row definition to auto. This means now that the row just uses the height of the highest element in that row, which is in our case the orange rectangle with a height of 50. The leftover space, which is the star-sized row definition, is the area of the grid that will shrink and grow when you resize the grid. Great! Now you learned about the 3 sizing approaches: pixel, star, and auto. Star is the value that you want to use for a row definition that should grow or shrink. The width property of a column definition supports exactly the same sizing approaches: pixel, star, and auto. And also there, the default value is 1 star. Now, let's apply your gained knowledge and let's adjust the grid in the Customers application. Let's switch to Visual Studio. Here I've opened the main Windows SAML file of the Customers application, and you can see the designer on the right side. Now let's start with the first row definition that contains the main menu. We can set the height property on that row definition to a value of auto, and now you see in the designer it is now automatically as high as the menu. Let's do the same with the second row definition that contains the header. So now the header is just high enough to display that logo PNG file correctly. The third row definition contains here the customer list and the customer details, and this row definition should actually grow and shrink when you resize the window. So on that one, the height property should be set to 1 star. But as this is the default value, let's just omit this property. The last row definition is for the status bar. Let's set this one also to a height of auto. Now the row definitions look actually quite good. Let's continue with the column definitions. The second column with the customer details should grow and shrink when a user resizes the window. So that column definition should have a width of 1 star, which is the default value. So let's omit it. And on the first column definition, the size looks actually quite good. So you can set this to a pixel value of 250, as this is the half of the 500 width that we have set in the designer. Let's make the window in the designer a bit wider, and now you see the customer details grow, but the column with the customer list keeps that width of 250 pixels. When you set the width property of this first column definition also to 1 star, this first column gets the half of the window width. Now I want to show you one more thing. Instead of hard-coding here the 250, you could also set this to a width of auto. Now you see it's automatically as wide as this customer list actually needs to display these 3 buttons at the top. This looks actually really good. Now let's run the application and let's see the layout in action. Here we have the menu at the top with the 2 menu items, customers and products. Then there is the header, the customer list on the left side, the customer details on the right side, and the status bar at the bottom. When you resize this window, you can see it's the column with the customer details that grows and shrinks. You can also see that it is this row of the grid with the customer list and the customer details that grows and shrinks. Great, so this looks already good. In the next clip, you will learn how to position elements in XAML because the header looks not so nice in the application. Let me show you how you can align these items in the header.